The biggest reset is coming to the music industry probably sooner than you'd think. And what's interesting is, I've seen this movie a couple of times before. We are about to see a changing of the guard where 40% of musicians get pushed out in place for a younger, more dynamic 40% of new musicians. This is going to be the biggest reset of a generation, which also means it's going to be the biggest land grab of a generation. And today, we are going to look at why this is happening, what you can do to maximize this opportunity and make sure that you have a career that spans the next 10 or 15 years until the next great reset. So let's rewind to 2008, 2009. The music industry has been on up for a long, long time, but recorded revenues, which declined around 2008, didn't recover until 2019. We're all aware of 2008 and the financial crash, but what ensued was a recession. Now, what that meant was the music industry started to contract. Everything started to get smaller. People stopped spending money and the music industry started to shrink, especially for musicians who made their living from playing gigs. Whilst the number of gigs was contracting, the number of musicians looking for work wasn't. And so competition got very, very fierce. Now, when this happens, it doesn't take that much effect on the top 20%. It usually starts off with the bottom tier musicians. But then, once they're out of the way, it goes to the next rung and the next rung and the next rung. Now, when panic sets in, musicians start to drop their price, looking for any work that's available so that they can feed themselves and their family. Now, fast forward to today, and there is a huge cost of living crisis. It is a recession without it technically being called a recession, but we can see what's coming and we know what's around the corner. Now, here's the issue. On the whole, musicians and people in general tend to spend the money that they have coming in. In fact, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, which means if they go without that paycheck, they have a huge problem instantly. Also, as you get older and more established in life, your outgoings tend to get more expensive. Therefore, you want a nicer place to live. You don't want student digs. You want a kind of nicer car, so you might have a bigger car loan. So not only have you got more rent, which comes with bigger bills, you've got a bigger car loan, you might have more insurance. All of a sudden, these fixed costs go up. So in a recession, price is important. But the problem is the price of your work is very important to you. But it's also now become very important to the person who is hiring you. Now, this opens the door for less experienced musicians than yourself. They might not be as good as you, they might not be as experienced as you, but they don't have the same fixed outgoings, so therefore they can lower their prices. Now, when it hits a recession, the client needs to cut their costs. They have now got a much tighter budget than they did maybe a year ago. But the more experienced musician can't compete with costs, and therefore their gigs start to dry up. But that's only stage one. And what happens next, which is stage two, not only makes it more tricky, but it takes a temporary change into a permanent problem for the experienced musician. You see, as the less experienced musicians come through, they're also bringing through their trends, their style, their gear, their feel. All of a sudden, they are changing consumption by the very nature that they are doing things in a slightly different way. And because of that, consumption habit and fashion changes, which means the more experienced musician becomes not only more expensive, but also out of date. Now, this bit's really interesting. Clients don't want a cheap version of something. What they want is an updated version of something with its own price point. And this is what the new generation can bring to the table. It starts off as a cheaper alternative, but all of a sudden it becomes the industry standard. And when the old guard try and evolve into what the new musicians are doing, they come across as cheesy. So with this carnage on the horizon, like a huge storm that you are watching coming, what do you do next? And that depends on your age and experience. So we are going to take two scenarios.
Guys, quick interruption. You're clearly releasing music and serious about getting results. So have you checked out DK Music Business Academy? It's got over 50 hours worth of courses, including the Roadmap to 1 Million Streams course. On top of that, you've got live sessions with me every single week and a community of like-minded musicians from all over the world. And as well as that, there's even my playlisting tool, Sonar, where you can get in touch with playlist curators when you're releasing music. What have you got to lose? 7-day free trial, links in the description. Let's crack on with the video.
So the first scenario is the musician who's at college, or maybe has just left college and graduated over the last, say, 2 to 3 years. Probably in your early 20s and probably have low outgoings. Well, if that's the case, You just won the lottery, and now your job is to be at the front of the queue. Now, what's really interesting is I was with a friend of mine the other day, and he said he was on a gig with a musician that week, and this young musician has said 3 things are important when I take on the gig, which is how much I get paid, how far I have to travel, and how much fun it is. And they have to tick 2 of the boxes for me to say yes to the gig. And the first thing I thought was, oh, there is too much money in this industry, and things have been too easy for too long if you think that's an acceptable behavior for what is coming over the next couple of years. So if scenario 1 is you, then you need to get practicing. You need to be ready. You need to be gym fit. And I mean going to the gym, be ready. I want you to start contacting bands and artists and musicians saying, give me your set list, give me your songs, I'm going to learn them. I will be available and I will be ready for that call. Now, as well as you're playing, you need to start thinking about what you're wearing. You need to think about your gear and having industry standard gear. You need to make sure that you can drive to be able to get to these gigs. You need to be ready at the drop of a hat. And not only that, you need to be getting these messages across on your social media. So if you're a bass player, if you're a guitarist, if you're a drummer, you need to be making content on a regular basis, which basically says, I am here and I am ready. Then there's scenario 2. Scenario 2 means you're probably 30 plus. You've probably got some dependents, maybe a wife, maybe some kids. You've probably got a mortgage, high rent, you've got car loans, you've got fixed outgoings. You can't just sofa surf like the kid in scenario 1. Now, if this is you, your job is not to compete with the kid in scenario 1 because you can't. You've got too many outgoings and you've got the experience. Trying to compete will literally be a fatal mistake. Your job is to compete with everyone else who's in the 30 plus market, everyone else who's got high fixed outgoings, everyone else who's got the dependents. But you're going to make sure that you are in the top 10%. So this means you need to play better than everyone else. You need to look better than everyone else. You need to get to the gym because you can't have the extra dad bod. What you wear didn't make that much of a difference a year ago. It very much makes a difference now. You're also posting on socials, and now you're saying, no, I might be older, but I've got the experience, the ability, and it shows when I make content. This is a fight, and your job is to hang on for dear life until this blows over. Then there's a couple of things that both of these guys can do. Number 1 is take your outgoings down to as minimal as possible. So if the shit does hit the fan, you have more time to be able to get those gigs and make that money. Then you also need to be as employable as possible. So if you drive a car, might be worth upgrading to a van. If you don't have a PA, it might be worth buying a PA whilst you've still got some money now, because that gives you a lot of leverage when it comes to gigs. As well as that, more instruments. Do you play bass? Do you play piano? And do you sing? Those are 3 instruments that will always have gigs because there's so few bass players. There's so few piano and keyboard players. And if you can sing, you always have the control of being able to go out and get your own gigs. Think of it like this. When there's less gigs, you have to be more available. You have to be able to travel further. You have to be able to play for longer. You have to be able to give more value because now you are not competing for lots and lots of gigs like there was 2 years ago. Now you are competing for the few, and so is everybody else. And that means you have to be able to run faster than them. Lastly, I want you to think about this. When it comes to recession, it's all over YouTube. Everyone thinks there's going to be a big sign of someone saying, the recession starts now, 3, 2, 1, press the button. It doesn't happen like that. And by the time you realize that we are full on into a recession, it will be too late. When it comes to managers, live agents, artists, they will be looking for deals. They'll be looking around to keep their costs down, and they'll make decisions very, very quickly. So you have to be ready and not waiting until the button is pushed to get ready. Think of it like this. If there's a fire sale and someone can get LeBron James for half the price, that's great, but it means someone's on their way out. This is about being ready for opportunities. This is about being the most employable. This is about being the best that you can be. Whether there's a recession in 5 years or whether we are flying high, these are lessons that will keep you performing, keep you gigging for the rest of time, as long as you follow the same guidelines, which is this isn't about a recession, this is about your career. But if the shit hits the fan, and I really do think it will, I do think this will be another great reset, the same way as it was in 2008, 2009. And if that's the case, you need to be ready. Think of it like the film Forrest Gump. They go out in their little tiny boat doing some shrimping, and then there's a huge storm and everyone gets wiped out apart from that one little boat. And what happens? They have the head start, and that turns them into a multi-billion-dollar corporation.
about.
And hopefully this isn't too scary, but what I do know is I went through this in 2008. In fact, not only did I go through this, but I built a multi-million-pound business off the back of exactly what we are talking about in this video. So whilst this could be an amazing opportunity and land grab if you are a young, hungry, up-and-coming musician, it could also be a pretty scary time if you've got a lot of dependents and quite a lot of outgoing. But one thing is for sure, recessions come and go, and whether this is a year or 18 months or 2 years, all you have to do is be at the top of your game and ride it out for that period of time. And at that point, everything gets a lot easier. So guys, thank you so much for watching. If you can do me a huge favor, just hit that like button before you leave, because it does make a huge difference to the YouTube algorithm. And also, if you don't subscribe, why not come and be a part of the community, because we're doing this all the time. Otherwise, stay safe, and I'll catch you soon.